He was 6 years old when the sky opened. Not with light, not with rain, but with fire. Valmar had always been quiet, a mining colony buried deep in the outer rim, forgotten by war and overlooked by maps. The people there lived in stillness, beneath grey hills and rust-colored skies. Tairn Lenico had never known what a blaster sounded like. He had never seen a lightsaber. He had never heard a scream that didn't come from a playful sibling. Until that night. They came without warning, Sith warships cutting through the clouds like blades through skin. No alarms, no defense grid, just the sky bleeding open and the mines shaking from above. Children ran, parents shouted, and in the streets of the central district, houses burned before anyone knew they were under attack. Tairn's mother wrapped him in a blanket, not to keep him warm, but to hide the scarlet glow from his eyes. His father stayed behind a worker, not a fighter wielding a mining tool like it was a weapon. It wasn't. It never had been. The Sith who struck him down didn't even pause. Tairn didn't cry when it happened. He didn't scream. He didn't move. He just watched. The way some people watch a storm from behind glass. Helpless, frozen. When Republic forces finally responded, it was too late. The raid had lasted 15 minutes. But in that time, over 200 settlers were gone. Burned, crushed, taken. Valmar would never recover. And neither would the boy. They found Tairn in the rubble of his home, curled beneath a broken staircase, whispering to himself. He hadn't spoken in hours. His mother was beside him, her hand still around his wrist, her eyes open, but no longer seeing, her skin scorched where she had shielded him from the blast. The medics who arrived tried to pull him away. He didn't let go. They sedated him, lifted him gently, and carried him to the medical frigate hovering above what was left of the colony. Later, doctors said it was a miracle he survived, that his vitals were strong, that he would recover. But when a Jedi healer visited his room weeks later, she paused before the bed and said only one thing. He is whole in body, but something in him is missing. She didn't mean his soul, or his hope. She meant silence. That echo inside his mind, cold and watchful, like someone had closed a door and left him alone inside. Tairn didn't speak for months. He listened, he observed, but he said nothing. Not even when other orphan children cried in the night. Not even when a Republic general offered to adopt him. Not even when he was given new clothes, new shoes, a datapad filled with games and lessons. He didn't want any of it. He wanted the red sky to come back, just once, so he could ask why. But it never did. Instead, he was transferred off-world, sent to a military orphanage on Corellia. It was clean, structured, safe, but Valmar never left him. The fires, the smell of scorched metal, the silence that followed. They followed him into every room, every dream. Tairn was just a boy, but he never forgot what it felt like to be powerless, to kneel beside a mother who could no longer speak, to see a father fall without purpose. He remembered the robes the attackers wore, black but not empty, flowing like shadows that breathed. He remembered the way one of them turned, just for a moment, and stared directly at him. Not with hate, not with pity, but with curiosity, as if to say, I see what you are. He didn't understand it then, but one day, he would. The Republic called it a recovery, a safe transfer, a future. But for Tairn Lenico, Corellia was not a second chance, it was exile. The military orphanage was efficient. Children were given beds, daily meals, schedules, and purpose. Discipline replaced therapy. Orders replaced affection. There were no soft voices here, only instruction, and for many, that brought comfort. Tairn didn't resist. He woke early, trained harder, memorized faster. He never asked for help, but never failed a task. The supervisors called him focused. The other children called him strange. He wasn't cruel. He didn't lash out. But when others cried at night, Tairn sat still, eyes open, watching shadows dance across the ceiling. Some nights he didn't blink at all. At age 9, he was moved to a junior cadet program not because he requested it, but because they saw potential. Tactical understanding, threat analysis, calm under pressure. He was the kind of child who didn't flinch at blaster fire simulations. The kind of boy who didn't ask why things happened, only how to prevent them. In the simulations, he always protected his unit. He always succeeded. But his instructors noticed something else, too. Tairn never hesitated to make hard decisions. When the scenario required a sacrifice, he didn't stall, he didn't debate. He made the call. One instructor asked him why. Tairn answered simply, "Because I don't want anyone else to lose what I lost." They thought it was maturity, leadership, but it was grief reshaped into obedience. He didn't hate the Sith, not yet, but he hated the silence they left behind. The way they disappeared before the Republic could answer. The way justice felt like vapor, always slipping through fingers. So he decided to become a blade, not for revenge, not for anger, but to fill the silence. By 17, he'd been fast-tracked into Special Forces prep, the youngest in his unit, colder than most, smarter than all. Tairn didn't talk unless spoken to. He never smiled, but his record was flawless. He could lead. He just didn't want to. He preferred solo infiltration, surveillance, disabling targets from a distance, then vanishing before anyone noticed. He was a ghost in Republic colors. Other soldiers trusted him, but never got close. They said he had the eyes of someone who had already seen too much, who was still looking for something he couldn't name. But the truth was simpler. Tairn wasn't looking for anything. He was waiting for the war to explain itself, for the Force, if it existed, to justify what it had done to him, for some meaning to emerge from the rubble he still carried. And nothing ever came. Only more missions, more orders, more shadows. He memorized enemy positions, tactics, ship registries, and Sith patrol patterns. He knew how to lie under fire, how to bleed without flinching, how to kill without question. But even as he fought for the Republic, something inside him remained detached. He did not believe in victory. He did not believe in peace. He believed in control, because control meant no more surprises. Control meant he would never be that child again, huddled under a staircase, begging the sky to stop burning. And yet, sometimes, in the quiet after a mission, when he stared at the stars from a gunship window, he would remember her hand, his mother's, trembling against his. And he would clench his fist, not from pain, not from sadness, but from the hollow truth that no one in the galaxy could ever give that moment back. And if they couldn't give it back, then maybe someone would have to take something instead. They captured the Sith on Balmorra. A mid-level warlord, mask cracked, robes torn, bleeding from a wound he refused to acknowledge. Republic forces had cornered him in an abandoned factory, and Tairn was on the recovery team sent to secure the perimeter. It should have been routine. Instead, it became the moment everything shifted. The Sith wasn't defiant. He wasn't broken either. He sat on the cold floor in chains, spine straight, gaze calm, and head tilted slightly, as if he saw through everything around him. Most officers avoided eye contact. Tairn didn't. He stared. The Sith looked back, and for just a second, Tairn felt something reach through him. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't fear. It was recognition. Later, when the warlord was interrogated, he spoke no words. He simply watched, his face unmoved, even under sedation. He was a prisoner, but he looked at his captors like they were the ones who didn't understand what was coming. Tairn watched the recordings. Again and again. He told himself it was tactical, gathering intel, studying expressions, looking for weaknesses. But it wasn't. He was drawn to it, pulled toward something he couldn't explain. The Sith didn't blink, didn't beg, didn't resist. He just waited, like time meant nothing. Tairn began asking questions. What did he believe? What did the Sith see when they closed their eyes? How did they endure so much pain without losing their minds? And more quietly, more dangerously, why did he feel closer to the prisoner than to the soldiers sitting beside him? He started reading classified reports, declassified mission logs, first-hand accounts of Jedi who had faced the Sith and walked away changed. He never said it out loud. But something in the darkness was speaking, not in words, not in commands, just a sensation. Like the cold edge of a knife resting against the back of his mind. Tairn became quieter, not weaker, not distracted, just distant. When one of his squadmates was injured in a mission, Tairn neutralized the attackers with brutal precision, not out of anger, not out of loyalty, but because he understood, in that moment, what it meant to be cornered, what it meant to be seen as expendable, and he would not allow anyone under his command to be discarded the way his family had been. But even then, the line between protection and power began to blur. There was a moment, during an undercover operation on Iridonia, when Tairn came face to face with a Sith acolyte, younger than him, arrogant, untrained. The acolyte ignited his saber. Tairn stood motionless. The fight lasted seconds. The Sith fell, but instead of reporting the body, Tairn knelt beside it. Not to loot, not to mourn, to study. There was no terror on the acolyte's face, no shame. Only peace, like he had died with purpose, with certainty. Tairn couldn't remember what that felt like. He returned to base without incident. But that night, he didn't sleep. He sat in his bunk, eyes open, remembering the Sith prisoner's gaze, the way it didn't waver, the way it seemed to ask, "Why are you pretending?" He didn't know the answer, but he knew the question wouldn't leave. And somewhere deep inside, a seed had been planted. Not by the Sith, not by war, but by silence. The same silence he had carried since Valmar. The same silence that had never truly left him. And now, it was beginning to take shape. They started calling him the Quiet Blade. Not because he moved silently, but because he spoke only when there was truth to say. In a republic built on noise, orders shouted, blasters whining, commanders barking. Tairn Lenico became the stillness in every room he entered. He was young, but his presence felt older, worn, sharpened, a weapon carved from memory rather than metal. His instructors praised him, his superiors trusted him. But the men and women who fought beside him whispered something else. He doesn't fear death, they said. He doesn't fear anything. They were wrong. Tairn feared only one thing, becoming powerless again. Every mission reinforced the same lesson. The galaxy would not slow for grief. It would not pause to let a boy heal. It only demanded more precision, more strength, more control. And Tairn gave it what it wanted. Mission after mission, year after year, He was 19 when he led his first independent infiltration on Onderon, a warehouse operated by Sith sympathizers. The operation was meant to be reconnaissance, simple, clean. But the enemy discovered them, and the situation collapsed into chaos. Most young soldiers freeze the first time real danger surrounds them. Tairn didn't. He moved through the dark like he understood it, passed between crates and burning walls with the same calm he once had when walking the halls of the orphanage. The squad survived because he refused to let fear guide him. Not one casualty, not one hesitation. When they returned to base, the unit medic asked him how he kept so calm. Tairn didn't answer, but inside he knew why. He had already lived through the worst night of his life at 6 years old. No battlefield could hurt him more than that memory. Word spread quickly through the ranks. A soldier who didn't waver, a young man who didn't break. Officers began requesting him specifically, not because he made missions easier, but because he made outcomes certain. Still, the quiet around him grew. People respected him, but didn't approach him. They thanked him, but didn't sit with him at meals. They followed him in battle, but didn't speak to him after the victory. Tairn didn't mind. Loneliness had been his first language. But one commander, a veteran from the mid-rim campaigns, pulled him aside after a long patrol and said something that stuck with him for years. "You fight like someone who isn't trying to live," she said. Tairn didn't react. "I fight to end fights." Her eyes softened. "No. You fight to end yourself." He didn't answer. He didn't argue. He simply saluted and walked away. But her words found a place inside him, a place he thought he had buried, and for the first time in years, he wondered if the shadows in him were really scars or seeds. Even then, something else was changing. During missions involving Sith activity, Tairn felt a strange pull, a tension in his chest, a quiet hum in the air. At first, he dismissed it as adrenaline, stress, the echo of old fear. But there were moments, brief, fleeting, when he could sense danger before it appeared, when a hallway felt wrong, when a corner felt watched, when an enemy seemed to reveal themselves seconds before they moved. It didn't make sense. He wasn't force-sensitive, not in any way recorded, but the instincts were real, reliable, growing. His superiors chalked it up to talent. Tairn knew better. Something in him was waking, and the galaxy, without realizing it, began giving him a new name. Not the Quiet Blade, not the survivor of Valmar, but the one who always arrived first, the one who always knew, the one who walked unafraid into places others feared to enter. They called him Havok, a nickname then, a whisper within the barracks. But like all things born in silence, it would one day become the only name he had left. They said he was the youngest field operative in his division's history. At 21, Tairn Lenico had already completed more black missions than most would see in a lifetime. His record was perfect, clean, clinical. But when asked to debrief, he rarely spoke in detail, because the truth didn't belong on paper. It belonged in memory where it stayed sharp. The Republic's Strategic Information Service had trained him well. Interrogation, extraction, sabotage, psychological profiling. But none of that prepared him for the day he met Darth Kelron. Captured during a failed Sith coup on Raltia, the Dark Lord had been subdued by Republic commandos after nearly annihilating an entire company with force fire. He was ancient-looking, with yellow eyes and a voice that never rose above a whisper. They kept him restrained in a reinforced chamber, behind a transparisteel wall. No force dampeners, just space and silence. Tairn didn't request the assignment, but he volunteered when it came. Observation only, they said. No direct engagement, just watch, learn. So he did. Every day for 9 days. He stood behind the surveillance glass and watched the Sith Lord sit perfectly still, hands resting on his knees, as if he were meditating, waiting for something. He never spoke, not to guards, not to droids, not even to the Jedi liaison assigned to keep him stable. But on the 5th day, something shifted. Tairn arrived early. The lights were dim, the room cold, and Darth Kelron turned his head slowly and looked directly into the glass. He shouldn't have been able to see. The mirror was one way. But the Sith didn't blink, didn't smile. He just looked, as though he'd been expecting Tairn. As though he recognized him. Tairn didn't move. For the first time in years, he felt something rise in his chest. Not fear, not anger, curiosity. Later that night, he reviewed the surveillance footage. He watched that stare again, paused the moment the Sith's eyes aligned with his, studied the angle, the posture, the stillness. It wasn't an act of intimidation. It was invitation. An unspoken question. Do you understand yet? Tairn closed the file. He didn't tell anyone what he felt. He didn't report the encounter as unusual. But when he lay in bed that night, the Sith's gaze followed him not like a threat, but like a reflection. He began researching Kelron's background, archives, battle records, intelligence logs from the Great Galactic War. The Sith had once been a Jedi exiled for questioning the Council. He had studied the Force's will and declared that it had none. The Republic branded him a traitor. The Empire called him a prophet. Tairn didn't know what to believe, but something in that history felt familiar. Not the power, not the heresy, the silence. That same cold echo he'd felt since Valmar. Since the night the sky turned red and never turned back. Kelron died in captivity 2 weeks later. Poison. Suicide, they said. No last words, no message. Just an empty chamber and a datapad filled with unreadable fragments of Sith code. Tairn was assigned to another mission immediately. But the Sith's gaze stayed with him. It followed him into shuttle corridors, into briefing rooms, into the quiet between heartbeats during live fire. And slowly, Tairn began to understand what that stare meant. It wasn't warning. It was recognition. A mirror offered by a man already too far gone to lie. War doesn't change in a single moment. It changes in small ways, inside small choices, until one day a soldier looks back and no longer recognizes the path he took to get there. For Tairn Lenico, that shift began on Nar Shaddaa. The Sith had received intelligence about a Sith courier operating in the lower industrial zones, carrying encrypted battle plans meant for a Darth overseeing operations in the Mid-Rim. Tairn was sent with a 3-person unit to intercept. The descent through the city's toxic haze felt routine. The landing, the approach, the synchronized sweep of abandoned structures. But something was different. Before they made visual contact, Tairn felt a pressure in the air, a warning, like the static just before a storm breaks. He raised his fist, halting the squad. They didn't ask why. They trusted his instincts more than any scanner. Seconds later, a turret activated in the shadows, firing into the space where they would have walked. If Tairn hadn't hesitated, they would have died. A lucky guess, the squad medic said afterward. A pattern analysis, their commander joked. But Tairn knew better. It wasn't logic. It wasn't experience. It was something else, something deeper than skill. A whisper beneath his awareness, nudging him toward survival. The courier escaped that day, but the SIS saw Tairn differently afterward. He was given higher-risk missions, longer assignments, operations deep in Sith-controlled territory where survival depended on more than training. And on each mission, the feeling grew. On Zyust, he sensed an ambush before the first blade was drawn. On Sereno, he identified a double agent before the man even reached for his communicator. On Balmora, he guided his unit through collapsing factories as if he'd already walked the path before. His commanders called it brilliance. Jedi advisors called it intuition. Tairn called it something he could no longer ignore. The more he studied the Sith, the more the strange awareness sharpened. In every hololog, every interrogation report, every captured artifact, he saw patterns that others overlooked. Movements that spoke of purpose, eyes that spoke of certainty. He began to understand their logic. Not their cruelty, not their hunger, but their clarity. That raw, unbroken belief in one's own path. Something he had never found in the Republic, no matter how many medals or missions he completed. And with every step deeper into Sith's work, he felt that clarity calling to him. It was strongest on the fourth mission that year, during an extraction on Duro. A Sith apprentice cornered their evacuation route, saber drawn, breath steady despite the damage around them. Tairn moved to engage, not because he had to, but because something in him wanted to understand. The clash lasted only a moment. The apprentice struck. Tairn dodged. A blaster round found its target. As the Sith fell, he didn't curse or scream. He simply looked up at Tairn with something like acceptance. "You hear it too," he whispered. Then he died. Tairn didn't report the words. He didn't tell the squad. He didn't even write a note in the debrief. But that whisper lived in him for months. He tried to drown it in training. He tried to bury it beneath orders. He tried to forget the feeling of standing above someone who should have been his enemy, but instead felt like a mirror. The line between fear and fascination was gone now. He no longer looked at the Sith as monsters. He looked at them as people who understood something he had been running from since childhood. And with each mission, each silent recognition, each instinct that defied explanation, Tairn felt the truth forming, quiet and dangerous. He was not moving toward the Republic. He was drifting toward the fire they feared. At first, it was only a feeling, a weight in the chest, a faint tension behind the eyes, the kind of presence you can't name but know is watching. It followed Tairn from mission to mission, never loud, never sudden, just there. In the quiet, in the stillness between orders, like a voice too distant to hear but too close to ignore. It wasn't coming from the outside. It was rising from within. Tairn tried to explain it to himself. Stress, fatigue, psychological drift, all common in deep operatives. But his vitals were stable, his reports consistent. He showed no signs of breakdown. If anything, his performance was improving. That was what frightened him. Because he wasn't fighting harder. He was fighting easier. Too easy. Enemy patterns made sense before they formed. Words spoken by informants sounded predictable, like reading lines from a script. His perception of people of danger began to feel less like strategy and more like memory, like he had already lived each moment before stepping into it. He asked for silence in his bunk. He stopped socializing between missions. And at night, when the lights dimmed and the barracks emptied, he found himself reaching out into nothing. Not physically, but mentally. He didn't know what he was looking for, only that something was there. And when he let go of thought, when he allowed himself to drift, the whisper returned. It wasn't a voice. It wasn't language. It was weight, gravity, like the force pulling threads he didn't know he carried. And it was familiar. It felt like the silence on Valmar after the fires went out. It felt like the stare of Darth Kelron through one-way glass. It felt like the last words of the apprentice on Duro. You hear it too. The Republic trained him to recognize patterns. And now the pattern was clear. The darkness wasn't following him. It was waiting. He began studying Sith holorecords in private. Not the ones locked away in Jedi archives, but the ones recovered from battlefields. Redacted transcripts, sensor echoes, fragments of language, names, forgotten teachings. He didn't seek power. He wasn't looking for a path. He just wanted to understand why the Sith spoke of freedom when others called them slaves to emotion. Why they smiled when faced with death. Why they believed pain wasn't a curse, but a doorway. And the more he read, the more it resonated. Because Tairn had never feared pain. He had grown up inside it. The whispers began to change. Less like pressure, more like presence. As if a current was flowing through him. When he let his mind go quiet, it didn't speak. It didn't command. It simply existed and invited him to listen. So he did. Sometimes between blaster fire. Sometimes between breath. He let it in. A little at a time. It made him stronger, sharper. He moved before danger arrived. He felt the intent of his enemies before they struck. The Force didn't answer his questions, but it showed him how to survive. His connection to the SIS remained solid. His performance reports were flawless, but something in his eyes began to change. The operatives noticed it first. He didn't blink as much. He didn't ask questions in briefings. He didn't seem angry, just far away. Like his mind was always walking somewhere else. And it was. Back through the ashes of Valmar. Back through the quiet stare of Sith prisoners. Back through corridors of burning stone and dying Jedi. Back toward the silence that had never left him. The darkness was no longer a stranger. It was the part of him that had waited for years to be seen. And now, he saw it too. The SIS called him indispensable. Commanders called him reliable. But in the quiet corners of the agency, the long halls where classified whispers lingered, they called him something else. Havok? The name began as a code designation. Nothing personal. Just a label for an asset who could destabilize enemy movements without leaving a trace. A field operative who left silence behind him. Not smoke. Tairn didn't ask for the name, but he didn't correct it either. It fit in ways his birth name no longer did. Because the more he served, the less he felt like the person he once was. The child beneath rubble. The cadet with shaking hands. The boy who tried to protect memory with discipline. That person had been buried under missions. Burned away in combat. Rewritten by every glance into a Sith's eyes. The Republic still called him loyal. Still gave him medals and directives. But they didn't understand what he had become. They saw precision. He felt fracture. Each assignment blurred the line further. His thoughts moved faster than orders. His hands acted before logic caught up. He was becoming instinct, living motion sharpened by something deeper than training. There was a moment on Taris that changed everything. A hidden Sith research site had been discovered beneath the old ruins. The SIS dispatched a strike team. With Tairn embedded as mission lead, intel suggested a small garrison. Moderate resistance. No Force users. The intel was wrong. The team breached the outer lab. Inside were no soldiers, only Sith acolytes, deep in meditation around a pulsating core. Artifacts lined the walls, the air trembled. Tairn stepped into the chamber and froze. He couldn't move, not from fear, but because something in the room recognized him. The acolytes didn't rise. They opened their eyes, one by one, and stared at him like they'd been waiting. They didn't reach for weapons. They didn't scream. They bowed their heads, just slightly, as if acknowledging something they weren't supposed to see. Tairn's team neutralized the lab. The operation ended in success. But in his report, he left that moment out. Not because it was dangerous, because it was personal. He didn't understand it fully, but he knew what he felt. Welcome. Not as a guest, not as an ally, as one of them. And that realization hollowed him out. He stood in the SIS debriefing chamber the next day, surrounded by officers who saw only the surface. The uniform, the achievement, the protocol. And in that moment, Tairn felt completely alone. Not in grief, in clarity. The Republic had given him structure, but not identity. Orders, but not answers. Victory, but not peace. The Sith offered no comfort, but they offered something he could never find in the bright halls of the Republic. They offered truth, even if it was painful, even if it destroyed him, because at least it was honest. Tairn began to dream again, visions of fire, ruins, voices in languages he didn't understand. He saw faces he had never met, symbols he had never studied. But when he awoke, he remembered every detail. Not like a dream, like memory. He started staying behind after missions, wandering ruins, touching stone carvings with reverence he couldn't explain. He felt the Force now, faint but undeniable, threading through every breath, every shadow. The Sith believed he was more focused than ever. But Tairn knew better. He wasn't focused. He was awakening. The fire inside him no longer frightened him. It called to him, and for the first time in his life, he wanted to answer. The mission was classified. It was meant to be clean, an infiltration of a Sith communications relay buried in the lower levels of Yartub system space. No direct contact, no casualties. A silent breach, a quiet retreat. But from the moment Tairn stepped off the shuttle, he knew something was wrong. It wasn't the silence he was used to silence. It was the absence of fear. The kind that should live in the walls of any Sith-held structure. The kind that echoes down dark corridors where too many voices have gone quiet. But there was none. The relay station was empty. No guards, no traps, no resistance. Only a door, already open. He should have called it in. He should have aborted. Instead, he stepped inside, and the last thing he heard was the soft hiss of pressure seals locking behind him. The lights went out. They didn't interrogate him. Not at first. They didn't threaten him. They didn't beat him. They didn't even restrain him. They just waited. Days passed without light. He was given food, water, sleep cycles, and silence. It wasn't a cell. It was a chamber, cold, soundproof, designed not to punish, but to empty. And slowly, it worked. Not by pain, but by stillness. He stopped thinking like an agent. He stopped asking how they knew he was coming. He stopped imagining an escape. Because deep down, he understood. This wasn't a trap. It was an invitation. When they finally moved him, they didn't bind his hands. 2 red armored guards escorted him through a hangar beneath a blackened sky. The rain fell sideways. The lightning never stopped. Dromund Kars. He had read about it, studied it, the heart of the Empire, the seat of the Dark Council, a world soaked in shadow, where the jungle itself whispered in the voices of the dead. But he never expected to see it, and he never expected it to feel familiar. The wind stung his face. The air was thick, almost alive. But he didn't flinch. He didn't look away. He looked up into the storm and felt it look back. They brought him not to a prison, but to a fortress. The halls were black stone, carved with symbols he almost recognized. The light was dim, but steady. Torches lined the walls, despite the presence of advanced tech. It wasn't for tradition. It was for effect. The Sith didn't just build temples. They built truths into architecture, into shadows, into the gravity of the air itself. And in the center of that truth waited a voice. Not loud, not cruel, just full. They called him Darth Havok, a lord of secrets, a manipulator of fates, a master of masks who never struck first because he never needed to. Tairn had heard the name whispered through Sith reports, a phantom behind operations the Republic could never trace, a strategist who turned enemies into pawns without ever showing his hand. And now, that hand had reached for him. Baraz didn't ask questions. He didn't need to. He only looked at Tairn the way Darth Kelron once had. Not with hate, with certainty, as if the moment had already happened, as if this wasn't a choice, but a step toward what had always been waiting. Tairn didn't speak, but something in him leaned forward, not in fear. In recognition. He had been captured, but it didn't feel like defeat. It felt like coming in from the rain. Darth Havok didn't speak for 3 days. Tairn was left in a dark chamber, not confined, not questioned, just observed. No lights, no windows, only the steady thrum of cast lightning in the walls. Time lost meaning. And still, he waited. When the door finally opened, the room didn't brighten. It only shifted. The air thickened. The silence grew heavier. And then, the voice came. It didn't echo. It didn't rise. It filled the space like a presence that had always been there. You already know why you're here. Tairn didn't answer. He didn't need to. Havok wasn't asking. He was stating a fact. You've been walking toward this moment since the fires of Valmar, he said. Since you stared into the storm and didn't close your eyes. Tairn's breath caught. No report had mentioned Valmar. No file had described the raid. That mission had been buried, lost in records too damaged to trace. But Havok knew. I see it in you, he continued. Not rage, not vengeance, not blind ambition. There was a pause. Heavy, measuring. I see hunger. Tairn didn't speak, but something inside him cracked open. Because for the first time in his life, someone had named it. That quiet ache behind every mission. That silence between heartbeats. That need not to destroy, but to become. Havok circled him, slow, deliberate. You served the Republic, he said. You followed orders, killed enemies, protected the weak, and all the while, what did they give you in return? He didn't wait for an answer. A name? A title? A bed in a room where no one dared speak your name. Havok stopped. You were never one of them. They sensed it, and so did you. The voice lowered. Because you were made for more. It didn't feel like flattery. It felt like fact. Havok didn't try to seduce him with promises of power. He didn't offer revenge. He offered understanding. You are not broken, he said. You are unfinished. That night, Tairn was left alone again. But the silence had changed. It wasn't empty now. It was waiting. The next day, Havok returned. No guards, no threats, only questions, quiet, precise. What do you fear? What would you sacrifice to understand yourself? What are you willing to lose to become whole? Tairn didn't answer, but he listened, and the answers echoed in his mind long after the voice had faded. Bearers began to show him things hollows of Sith rituals, histories buried by the Republic, teachings forbidden even to Jedi. Tairn didn't resist. He studied. He watched the rise and fall of Sith through centuries of blood and betrayal. He learned that strength was not given but taken, that pain was not weakness but passage, that the Force was not balance, it was will. The third week, Barras showed him a file, his SIS record, annotated by Republic Command. At the bottom, one word had been added after his capture: compromised. They had already erased him, and somehow he felt relief. There was no going back, only forward. The voice of Darth Barras returned one last time before his training began. "You do not need to choose," he said. "You already have." Tairn said nothing, but inside, he agreed. The Republic had given him purpose. The Sith offered him truth, and truth, no matter how dark, was something he had been starved for his entire life. Training did not begin with a weapon. It began with silence. The kind Tairn thought he understood until Dromund Kaas showed him what silence truly was. Not emptiness, not stillness, pressure. It lived in the stone floors. It clung to the walls of the academy. It breathed with the lightning outside, rising and falling like a living thing. Every acolyte felt it. Some broke under it within hours. Tairn did not break. But he didn't stand tall either. He learned to bend. The first lesson was obedience. Not blindly but consciously. Barras told him that obedience was not submission. It was direction. A way to focus desire into purpose. The overseers disagreed. They believed in pain. So Tairn experienced both. The acolytes trained in a courtyard beneath the storm. Blades humming, bodies colliding, screams swallowed by thunder. They taught him forms he had never seen. Movements inspired by rage and precision. Stances built on aggression, not restraint. He wasn't exceptional, not at first, but he adapted faster than the others. Every strike he took, he remembered. Every mistake carved itself into him like a map. Every cut was a lesson his body refused to forget. And when he fell, and he fell often, he rose without complaint. Some acolytes mocked him. Cis dog, Republic puppet, pretender. But the insults didn't reach him, because he knew what they didn't. He wasn't pretending. He was transforming. The second lesson was fear. Not fear of death. Fear of truth. They placed him in the trial chambers rooms built by Sith, who understood that darkness was not something you summoned. It was something you allowed to surface. In those chambers, illusions twisted into memories. He saw his mother again. He saw the fire. He saw Valmar buried under smoke and collapsed steel. But this time, he did not watch as a child. He walked through the ruins as the man he had become. The flames parted for him. The screams grew quiet when he approached. And when he reached the staircase where he had once hidden, he found only a shadow of himself, small, frightened, waiting for someone who never came. He knelt before the boy, not in comfort, in acceptance, because every piece of pain he had carried was part of him. Not a mark of weakness, a path. When he opened his eyes, the chamber lights flickered. The overseer, observing the trial, stepped back, unsure of what he had just witnessed. Tairn did not explain it. He didn't need to. The third lesson was truth. Barras taught it personally. Not through threats, not through promises, but through questions. What does the Republic fear most? Tairn answered without hesitation. Choice. Barras smiled. A small, a proving curve at the edge of a mask that never moved. What does the Sith fear? Tairn considered longer. Nothing, he said. They face themselves. Baraz stepped closer. And you, what do you fear? Tairn looked inward. Not at his wounds. Not at his rage. At the emptiness behind every mission he'd ever completed. Being nothing, he said quietly. Baraz's voice softened. Then become something. From that day, Tairn trained with a clarity he had never known. He learned to channel emotion, not suppress it. He learned to strike with intent, not hesitation. He learned that darkness was not an enemy. It was a mirror. And each time he stepped in front of it, he recognized more of himself than the boy the Republic had tried to shape. The fourth lesson was the hardest. Pain, not inflicting it, enduring it. Lightning, cold, blades, force pressure that crushed the breath from his lungs. Every trial stripped away something he no longer needed: fear, doubt, the illusion of who he thought he was. By the end of the cycle, the instructors no longer mocked him. They watched him, carefully, because the man who had arrived as a prisoner was gone. And in his place stood someone the darkness itself had begun to shape. They didn't tell him when the final trial would come. It arrived in silence, like everything else in his new life. One morning, a dark-robed acolyte entered his chamber and spoke only 2 words. "Come alone." Tairn followed, through the lower corridors of the academy, past relics half buried in stone, past statues of Sith whose names had been erased from history. They led him into the hall of sacrifice. It was not ceremonial. It was empty, cold. A single torch burned at the far end, its flame blue instead of gold. At the center stood Darth Baraz, and at his feet knelt another acolyte. Tairn recognized her, Lenico, a fellow trainee, strong, fierce, once a commander's daughter in the mid-rim. She had mocked him when he arrived, fought him twice, lost once. The second time, she hadn't returned. Until now, she looked up at him with broken eyes. Not from fear, from understanding. "This is your trial," Baraz said quietly. She was given the same choice. Lena didn't speak. She didn't beg. Baraz handed Tairn a saber, unignited. No hatred, no revenge, no performance. His voice was calm, only clarity. Tairn stared at the weapon in his hand. The same design he had once been trained to dismantle in Sith exercises. The blade of an enemy, a symbol of everything he was supposed to destroy. But in his hand, it felt natural, not foreign. He looked at Lena again, and saw himself. Not the man he was now, the one he had been. Lost, half-built, afraid of what would happen if he stopped running and simply accepted what the galaxy had already decided. He didn't ignite the saber. He knelt beside her. Baraz didn't stop him, because the trial was not about killing. It was about surrender. And in that moment, Tairn surrendered. Not to Baraz, to himself. He let go of what he had carried. The name Tairn Lenico, the SIS code, the Republic's illusions, the pain he had worn like armor. He let it fall away. And when he rose, it was without burden. He activated the saber. The blue flame turned red. Baraz approached and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are no longer becoming." He paused. "You are." In that instant, the storm outside grew louder, as if the world itself had acknowledged what had just happened. Tairn didn't feel victorious. He felt still. He had not been broken. He had been seen, accepted, named. The next day, he was given robes, not to hide, but to claim. every thread woven in crimson and black, marked with the sigils of Barra's line, a symbol of lineage, of belonging. He stood in the mirror, not as a servant, but as an heir. The others bowed when he entered, not out of fear, out of recognition. He was no longer a tool. He was a student of the Sith. But more than that, he was a believer, not in doctrine, in freedom, the kind that comes only when nothing is left to prove and nothing left to mourn. He walked the halls with silent purpose. The instructors no longer watched his movements. They studied them, because something in him had shifted, not suddenly, but completely. And as he walked beneath the statues of those who came before, he didn't wonder what he might become. He already knew. His story had always led here. And for the first time in his life, he didn't look back. They called it his ascension. But it didn't feel like rising. It felt like erasure. Darth Bearers summoned him without ceremony. No guards, no witnesses. Just silence, deeper than before. Tairn stepped into the dark hall, robes trailing behind him. His footsteps no longer echoed. He had learned to walk without being noticed, even when every eye in the room was watching. Barra stood before a map of the Outer Rim. Lines of red and blue flickered between worlds. Fronts moved. Armies died. But none of it mattered. Because this wasn't about a battlefield. It was about him. "You've done everything asked of you," Barra said. Tairn said nothing. "You've faced pain, silence, the truths that others drown in. You did not flinch." He turned slowly. "But you are not Sith until you have nothing left to cling to." Tairn met his gaze. There was no confusion in his eyes, only understanding. Boris handed him a data kip. One name, one target, no explanation. He didn't need one. The name belonged to Lord Khalid, a Sith trainer, elder strategist, and Barris's most trusted ally. The man who had overseen Tairn's physical instruction. The one who had broken his bones, bled him in duels, and stood in silent approval as he rose from every fall. He had never praised Tairn, but he had never doubted him. Now, he was the final obstacle. Barras didn't say why. He didn't need to. This was the last lesson. Not about combat, about loyalty, about identity. Tairn left Dromund Kars that night in a shuttle with no insignia, no crew, just a single destination, Korriban. He hadn't returned since his earliest days in training. Now, the planet welcomed him with storms and silence. The tombs watched as he walked. He found Lord Khalid in the meditation halls below the Valley of the Dark Lords. The older Sith sat cross-legged before a burning censer, eyes closed, arms bare. He didn't reach for his saber. He didn't rise. He already knew. Tairn didn't speak, but the weight of his presence said enough. Khalid opened his eyes. They weren't angry, they weren't surprised. "You came." Tairn nodded once. "I wondered if it would be you," Khalid said softly. "I told Barras you weren't ready." Tairn said nothing. Khalid stood, slow and deliberate. No words. Then, still silence. The older Sith exhaled through his nose. Not with sorrow, not with pride, with acceptance. "I taught you to survive," he said. "Let's see if you remembered how." The sabers ignited. Red light painted the stone walls. Khalid struck first sharp, controlled, patient. Tairn blocked, countered, moved with the same precision he had once been beaten for lacking. They didn't fight as enemies. They fought as mirrors. Every step Khalid had given him, every technique carved into bone and memory, returned to meet its maker. And in the space between each strike, there was something more than combat. There was grief. The kind that doesn't show in the face. The kind that lives behind the eyes of those who knew this was always coming. Khalid faltered, just slightly. Tairn didn't hesitate. One clean arc, a blade through the chest. Khalid dropped to his knees. He looked up, and for the first time, smiled. You learned. Then he fell. The censer still burned. Tairn stood over the body, breathing slow. He felt no joy, no regret, only clarity. The man who had built him was gone, and nothing remained of the one who had been built. The shuttle lifted from Korriban in silence. No records, no transmissions, no reports submitted. Only a trail of heat fading behind engines. Tairn sat alone in the passenger hold, hands resting on his knees. The saber lay across his lap, still warm from the final strike. His mind wasn't racing. It was still. The duel had ended quickly, but it hadn't been rushed. It had been precise, cold. He replayed the moment again, not to second guess, but to confirm. The footwork, the angle, the timing. There had been no emotion behind it. Not anger, not hate. Only purpose. Khalid's death was not a choice, it was a passage, like crossing a bridge that could not hold two men. One had to fall. Barras greeted him in the observation tower atop the citadel. No praise, no congratulations. Just a nod, and a new set of robes darker, heavier, lined with crimson thread. He took them without a word. They weren't a reward. They were armor. The council has approved your ascension, Barras said. You are no longer apprentice. You are no longer Sis. You are no longer Tairn Lenico. He stepped forward, voice deepening. Speak your name. Tairn looked at the robes, then at the blade still clipped at his side. Then into the storm beyond the viewport, where lightning danced across the skin of the capital. He didn't hesitate. Darth Havok, the name settled in the air like smoke. Not shouted, not declared, breathed. Barras didn't react, because he had known it all along. Havok bowed his head, but it wasn't submission. It was release. Of the past, of the names, of the illusions. What remained was flame, contained, directed, pure. He was taken to a private chamber beneath the citadel. There he was marked, not by ceremony, but by pain. A Sith ritual, older than the Empire itself, burned into the skin of his back, not for others to see, but for him to carry. Every scar was a reminder, nothing comes from comfort. The ritual didn't break him, it calmed him. When it ended, he stood without trembling. The acolyte who assisted him whispered that she'd never seen anyone endure it without screaming. He didn't respond, because the fire inside him had always been louder than anything they could carve into his flesh. Later that night, he stared at his reflection. The robes fit. The saber rested at his side like it had always been there. But it wasn't the garments or the weapon that changed him. It was the look in his own eyes. Cold, clear, still. Not like ice. Like truth. He wasn't empty. He was focused. The next morning, Barras summoned him again. You are mine now, he said. But not forever. Only until the galaxy knows your name the way I do. He handed Havok a datapad, a list of targets, Republic officers, Jedi outposts, senators who whispered of peace without knowing the war already lived inside their halls. Each name was tied to a world, each world to a lesson. This is how you will introduce yourself, Barras said. Havok nodded once. He wasn't eager. He wasn't reluctant. He was ready. He turned toward the landing bay, cloak dragging against black stone. boots echoing through the marble corridors where other Darths had once walked. Some had risen. Most had fallen. He did not care. He wasn't chasing legacy. He was becoming one. The fire in his blood no longer burned outward. It burned inward, controlled, disciplined, unyielding. And his eyes no longer searched for answers. They simply watched, like storm clouds before a world turns dark. The mask was presented to him at dawn, not by Baras, not by an overseer, by the Sith themselves, forged from Frick, dark as the storms above Kaz, lined with etchings that hummed faintly when touched, as if remembering the hands of the sculptor who carved them centuries ago. It wasn't ornate. It wasn't meant to intimidate. It was meant to reveal. Havok lifted it slowly, felt the weight, the chill of metal, the faint vibration of power woven between its layers. It didn't feel like armor. It felt like a mirror. He held it before his face. For a moment, he saw the reflection of the man he used to be, the boy hiding beneath broken stone on Valmar, the cadet who waited for orders, the Sith operative who executed missions without understanding why the silence inside him grew louder with every kill. Then he lowered the mask and saw none of that. Only the man shaped by pain, sharpened by truth, and freed by a willingness to break the chains he once mistook for purpose. Havok placed the mask against his skin. It sealed with a soft hiss. Not hiding him, completing him. He stepped into the ritual hall, where Baras stood waiting beside a circle of red flames. The air trembled with heat, thick with incense that made the senses blur. The torches flickered as if bowing. Baras studied him. "You understand what this means," he said. Havok nodded once. "The mask is not worn to conceal weakness," Baras continued. "It is worn to show the galaxy the face you chose, not the face you were given." Havok remained still, because those words echoed exactly what he felt. The Republic had given him a name. The Sith had given him a reason. The mask gave him identity. "Remove it," Baras said, testing him. Havok did not hesitate. He lifted the mask away, held it at his side. "What remains?" Baras asked. Havok's voice was quiet. "Me." Baras nodded. "Good. A mask does not change a Sith. It amplifies him. The galaxy must feel you before it fears you." Havok placed the mask back onto his face, securing it once more. The world dimmed around the edges. The sounds softened. The air grew still. One breath. Two. He felt the shift. He wasn't stepping into a role. He was stepping into truth. Later, alone in his chamber, he tested the mask sensors, its filters, its subtle integration with his armor. Everything worked flawlessly. But those things didn't matter. Not now. He stood in front of a mirror, staring into the empty eyes of the visor. Where his gaze should have been, there was only darkness. Yet behind that darkness, he felt more clarity than he ever had. For the first time, he wasn't looking at a reflection struggling to find itself. He was looking at a Sith who had already found the answer. The mask wasn't a disguise. It was a boundary, between past and future, between hesitation and purpose, between the man he had been and the Darth he had chosen to become. Throughout the day, he walked the halls of the citadel. Soldiers moved aside. Acolytes lowered their heads. Overseers stepped back. They didn't fear the mask. They feared the presence behind it. The way he moved without sound, the way he turned without effort, the way every step felt measured, intentional, as if carried out by someone who had accepted that pain was not punishment. It was clarity. In the evening, Baras joined him atop the overlook that faced the storm clouds of Kaz City. Lightning illuminated their silhouettes. "Do you know why the Sith wear masks?" Burroughs asked. Havok didn't answer. "Because the galaxy clings to faces, to names, to illusions. A masked Sith cannot be understood, only felt." The lightning crackled. "And you," Burroughs said softly, "were born to be felt." Havok looked into the storm. He did not see chaos. He saw destiny. The orders came without urgency. A single encrypted file. A name. A location. No speech. No ceremony. Just coordinates. And silence. The world was Grelok, a quiet trade colony near the mid-rim. It held no military value, no hidden weapons, no ties to the Jedi Council. But it was loyal to the Republic, proudly, publicly. And that was enough. The Empire didn't need it destroyed. It needed a message. Havok stood aboard the command deck of a cruiser that had no name. Just a symbol carved into the steel, a red triangle beneath a crescent moon. A mark used by Barra's private fleet. The crew didn't speak to him. They didn't question his presence. They moved around him like shadows around a fire, close enough to feel the heat, but never close enough to touch it. He didn't bark orders. He didn't raise his voice. He simply watched the planet through the viewport as the stars above it dimmed. Below, the people of Grelok began to panic. Shuttles scrambled. Signals burst through open frequencies, begging for answers. None came. Because Darth Havok did not speak to his enemies. He erased them. Orbital bombardment began at twilight. Precision strikes, government towers, military hangars, communication arrays. No more, no less. Controlled devastation. He watched the surface ripple with explosions like cracks forming across glass. One by one, the centers of power collapsed. No viral agents, no civilian massacres, just silence spreading outward. Targeted, cold, perfect. The Republic responded 3 hours later, but by then, there was nothing left to answer. Grelok wasn't conquered. It was emptied. And in the vacuum left behind, only one name was whispered across the stars. Havok. Not screamed, spoken, carefully. Like a shadow behind the door. The galaxy had seen monsters. It had seen tyrants. But this was something else. This was control. When the mission ended, he returned to Drummond Cass. No medals, no welcome, just Barras, waiting at the edge of the Citadel's upper hall, hands folded behind his back. "You did not hesitate," Barras said. Havok nodded once. "There was no anger," Barras continued. "There was no need," Havok replied. Barras smiled beneath his mask. "Then you are ready." That night, Havok removed his mask in private and set it gently on the table beside him. The metal was still cold, still silent. He stared at it for a long time, not in reflection, in confirmation. He wasn't hiding from who he was. He had become it. And now, the galaxy would follow. He stepped outside his chamber onto the narrow balcony above the valley. Cass thunder rolled overhead. The rain didn't fall. It hovered, suspended in the storm, like breath held between moments. He could still feel the fires of Grelok inside his chest. Not as guilt, not as pride, as truth. He had not destroyed the world because he wanted to. He had done it because the galaxy needed to remember what happened when it forgot who held the blade. And he had been forged for that purpose. The Republic had taught him how to fight. The Sith had taught him how to choose. But only the Force had taught him how to be still while everything burned. Below, the world churned with storms. Above, the stars did not blink. And somewhere far away, on a world still untouched by war, a child looked up at the night sky and asked their mother what Havok meant. She didn't answer. She only held the child tighter and whispered a prayer to a force that would never speak back. He stepped off the transport in full uniform, the same one he had worn before the betrayal, polished, seamless, Republic insignia stitched to the shoulder. To the soldiers on the landing deck, he looked like a ghost come home. Tairn Lenico, alive, recovered from capture, returned to duty, a walking victory. They didn't question it. They saluted him. Some cheered. One soldier wept. He returned the gesture with perfect discipline. Not too warm, not too cold. Just enough to let them believe the story Barras had written. Officially, his files said he had escaped imperial custody after months of deep torture, that he had survived an assassination attempt on Ziost, that he had returned with vital intelligence on Sith fleet movements. None of it was true, and all of it worked. The Republic needed a symbol, and now the Empire had given them one. A man they thought they had lost, now walking their halls again, quiet, unshaken, hardened by experience. They welcomed him without hesitation, because heroes are rarely questioned, especially when they come home wearing wounds you cannot see. Havok played the part well. He returned to the Strategic Information Service as a Special Operations Liaison, an advisory role. No command, no paperwork, just access. He knew the systems, he knew the blind spots, and more importantly, they still trusted him. They gave him clearance, let him observe battle strategies, whispered about Jedi deployments in his presence, allowed him to inspect secure hangars with nothing more than a nod. They didn't see the mask beneath the skin, because they didn't want to. To most, he had become something legendary. The agent who escaped the Sith, the survivor who bore no scars. But there were scars, they just lived in silence. Havok never spoke more than he needed to. His voice was calm, his steps measured, his posture exact. People called it focus. They didn't see the control behind it. The way every word had to be chosen, every movement calculated. Because every second in Republic space was war. Not with them, with himself. He reported to Barras in Shadow's encrypted transmissions, hidden channels. Barras never sent praise. Only tasks, targets, places to break. His first assignment was small, a refueling station above Denon. Havok planted a single virus in the station's central relay. It wasn't flashy. It didn't destroy anything. But 3 weeks later, a Republic supply convoy was ambushed by Sith warships and never arrived at the front. No one traced it back to him. The next task was bolder. He reassigned fleet assets on Duro through a quiet override in the Starport Command Center. Hours later, an Imperial task force bypassed Republic defenses and crippled their forward base. Again, no suspicion. Because the man sitting in the meeting room the next morning was Tairn Lenico. Quiet, loyal, alive. They toasted to him. Havok didn't raise his glass. He didn't need to. They were already drinking the lie. But underneath the surface, beneath the robes, beneath the armor, beneath the borrowed name, something old stirred. Not regret, recognition. These people weren't his friends, but they had once been. And as he stood among them, breathing the same air, hearing the same Republic anthem echo through the halls, he realized something else. They still loved him. Not because he had returned, but because they never believed he could leave. And that, more than anything, was dangerous. Because the mask he wore wasn't made of frick or steel. It was made of memories. And memories don't stay buried forever. Sabotage did not begin with explosions. It began with small things. A misplaced access code. A quiet request for a systems check. A corrupted file that no one noticed until it was too late. Darth Havok understood the Republic better than any Sith strategist ever could. He knew its routines, its errors, its blind faith in procedure. He knew that a single, subtle adjustment in the wrong console could break an entire fleet. And he never needed to lift a blade. On his 4th week back, he walked through the communications wing of a Republic dreadnought. Officers greeted him with smiles, nods, salutes. He moved past them like a shadow in daylight, unseen for what he truly was. He approached a panel near the navigation hub, typed 3 commands, inserted a small device no larger than a coin, walked away. Hours later, the dreadnought's entire starboard defense grid failed for 7 minutes. 7 minutes was all the Empire needed. While Havok sat calmly during a strategy briefing, Sith warships struck a Republic convoy 3 systems away, decimating it before reinforcements could arrive. The officers in the room cursed Imperial efficiency. Havok kept his face still. No pride, no guilt, only purpose. His next target was on Alderaan, not a military outpost. A meeting, a quiet council between neutral houses, attempting to rejoin the Republic's cause. Havok attended as a tactical advisor. He listened to noblemen speak of hope, peace, unity. When the meeting ended, he adjusted a single data port in the security archives. Hours later, Imperial agents infiltrated the palace, seized the negotiators, and ended the alliance before it began. No one traced the breach, because no one ever suspected the man who sat at the center of the tragedy. He was too calm, too steady, too familiar. The Republic had trained him well, but sabotage was not always bloodless. On Arda II, he accompanied a Jedi team investigating stolen Kyber fragments. He walked beside them through ruins that smelled of dust and memory. The Jedi greeted him warmly, calling him brave, calling him fortunate to survive Sith captivity. He didn't answer. Inside the central chamber, he lagged behind. Just a step, just enough. He pressed a panel hidden beneath an ancient console. A signal emitted. Imperial troops entered the temple. The battle began. Havok moved with precision, protecting who he had to, killing who he must, guiding the chaos until it shaped the outcome Baras wanted. A Jedi Knight fell before him, not because Havok struck him, because Havok moved aside and let the moment happen. Later, the survivors thanked him. They said he saved dozens of lives. He accepted the praise with stillness. Inside, the silence grew louder. His greatest sabotage came on a Republic refit yard orbiting Coruscant, a place he once admired as a cadet. Ships gleamed in rows like monuments to order. Workers hammered plates with pride. He walked through the hangar unnoticed. He inserted a device into a diagnostic port, then left. 3 days later, a Star Destroyer prototype failed its hyperlane calibration. The malfunction triggered a chain of implosions across the dock, destroying half the yard. The Republic called it a tragic accident. The Senate demanded investigations. Engineers blamed a systems glitch. No one questioned the survivor who had once been a hero. Havok returned to his quarters that night. Armor removed, mask set aside. The room was quiet, safe, familiar. And yet, something inside him was not. He sat on the edge of the bed, hands resting on his legs, breathing slow, steady. He had done everything he was expected to do, flawlessly, effortlessly, silently. But silence has a shape, and his was beginning to feel heavier. Not from doubt, from memory, because every step he took through the Republic, he walked through the ruins of the life he once lived. And some ruins still spoke. He wasn't supposed to see them again. Not the faces from before. Not the ones who still remembered him as Tairn. Not the ones who spoke his name with warmth instead of fear. But the Republic is vast, and war pulls old threads together in ways no one expects. It happened on Ord Mantell, a supply hub, nothing special. Havok arrived under the guise of an SIS consultant, tasked with evaluating troop morale. He walked the base with his usual calm, hands behind his back, steps measured, mask hidden beneath skin and discipline. Then he heard a voice, familiar, too familiar. Tairn. He turned. A woman stood at the end of the corridor, brown hair tied back, officer's stripes across her chest, eyes wide, trembling, hopeful. Commander Jessa Tairn, his former squad mate. The one who once shared rations with him during long campaigns. The one who taught him to steady his breathing before night ops. The one who sat beside him in silence on the night he received his first commendation, saying nothing, because she knew that silence meant more to him than celebration. For a moment, Havok felt the mask slip, just a fraction, but enough. She ran to him and embraced him before he could stop her. Her arms were warm, human, real. The kind of touch he hadn't felt since before the storm of Drummond Cass had carved a new name into him. "You're alive," she whispered. "Force, you're actually alive." He didn't return the embrace. But he didn't pull away either. When she stepped back, she studied him carefully. "You look different," she said softly. "Training changes people," Havok replied. His voice was steady, neutral, almost gentle. She smiled. "I always knew you'd come back." He didn't answer, because he didn't know how. Jessa took him to the officers' lounge. Others gathered around him, soldiers he once fought beside, recruits who had admired him, officers who remembered the quiet, disciplined soldier who never failed a mission. They asked questions. Where had he been? How did he escape? Did the Sith hurt him? Did he see any of their rituals? Havok answered as Tairn would have. Simple, controlled, honest enough to be believed, false enough to protect the Empire. As they spoke, he noticed details. A scar above Jessa's brow she didn't have before. A tremor in her hand when she lifted her drink. Fatigue behind her smile. The Republic was wearing her down. He should have felt satisfaction. He didn't. Later, when the room emptied and the lights dimmed, Jessa stayed behind. She sat beside him in quiet companionship, the way she used to, before everything burned. "I thought about you," she said. "Every time we lost someone, every time a mission went bad, I kept thinking, Tairn would have kept us together." Havok looked at the floor. Her voice softened. "You were the best of us." He didn't correct her, couldn't, because something inside him cracked open an old memory, faint and unsteady, of the man he once was. The man who believed saving lives meant something. The man who stood between his squad and danger without thinking twice. A man who no longer existed. Jessa reached out, touching his arm. "You're home now," she whispered. Her hand was warm, too warm. He stood. She didn't understand why, but he did. Because the more she believed in him, the more dangerous he became. Not to the Republic, to himself. He excused himself with a quiet lie about fatigue. She smiled and told him to rest. He walked down the corridor, steps slow, breath heavy. He had infiltrated starships, sabotaged fleets, guided Jedi into death traps. But this, seeing someone who still believed in Tairn Lenico, felt like the deepest cut. Because belief is a mirror, and for the first time in years, he saw a reflection he didn't recognize. The room was small, just a cot, a locker, a mirror bolted to the wall. Republic quarters were always the same: clean lines, sterile air, lights that hummed with predictable rhythm. Predictable, safe. Havok closed the door behind him and stood in the center of the room, letting the silence settle. It felt different here. Too warm, too familiar, like a place built for someone who no longer existed. He removed the gloves first, then the jacket, then the boots. Each piece felt heavier than the last. Finally, he looked up at the mirror. Tairn Lenico stared back. Not Darth Havok, not Baras's weapon, not the shadow planted behind enemy lines. Just the man he used to be. The Republic officer with steady hands and quiet discipline. The survivor of Valmar. The child who hid beneath the staircase while the sky turned red. The ghost. He stepped closer. The lights flickered, catching the tired lines beneath his eyes, the faint marks along his jaw where the mask had pressed. He looked older than he remembered. Not in years. In weight. He touched the mirror's surface. Cold. Like the metal of the mask he wore in the Empire. He imagined it now floating just behind his reflection, hungry to reclaim the face it belonged to. He could almost feel it tightening against his skin again, changing his breath, steadying his pulse, reminding him of who he had become. A Darth, a weapon, a storm given shape. But here, alone, he couldn't escape the fracture inside him. The silence he always carried now echoed differently, like two voices speaking at once, one from the man he had been, the other from the monster he was becoming. Both alive, both incomplete. He closed his eyes. For a moment, he let himself breathe without purpose. But memories returned with precision. The fires of Grelok, the Jedi who fell because he stepped aside, the fleets that died from his silent sabotage, the friends who still smiled at him without knowing the truth. He opened his eyes again. Tairn was still there, still watching, still asking, why? Not accusing, just wondering. Havok swallowed hard. He had never feared stepping into battle. Never feared pain, never feared death. But this, facing the reflection of a life he abandoned, this he feared. Because the man in the mirror wasn't weak, he wasn't soft, he wasn't naive. He was the last piece of humanity Havok had left, and he knew it. A soft knock at the door broke the silence. Tairn, a voice called gently. Jessa. He didn't answer. He waited until her footsteps faded down the hall before he stepped back from the mirror. He wiped his face with a steady hand. He didn't cry. Sith don't cry. But the ache in his chest pulsed slow, deep, familiar. He reached into his pack and pulled out a small, black object. The mask. Even dormant, it seemed to darken the air around it. He held it in both hands. It felt right. Too right. He lifted it, inches from his face. In the mirror, he watched the moment before transformation, the thin line between the man who used to believe in the Republic and the Darth who only believed in control. Just a breath. Just a choice. He lowered the mask. Not onto his face. Into the shadows beneath the cot. Hidden. Silent. Waiting. He couldn't wear it here. Not yet. Because if he did, Tairn Lenico would disappear forever. And Darth Havok knew the truth he could not speak aloud. Monsters do not fear the worlds they burn. They fear the people who still look at them like they're worth saving. He lay down on the cot, eyes open in the dark, listening to the quiet hum of the Republic ship. He didn't sleep. Sith rarely do. They only wait for the moment when the mask calls them back. The first time she saw him, he was covered in ash. A boy no older than 6, carried from the ruins of Valmar, wrapped in the tattered cloak of a medic who had already bled out beside him. He didn't cry, he didn't speak, he just stared at the ground, eyes unblinking, as if sound itself had been stolen from his throat. Jedi Knight Arlen Dorn was the one who lifted him. She remembered the weight. Too light, too still, like he wasn't made of flesh, but silence. The other survivors called him Tairn. He never told her that himself. She kept him alive for 3 days during the evacuation, made sure he ate, made sure he slept, sat beside him through the tremors in the night when he would wake up without screaming, just wide-eyed, breath held, like he wasn't sure if the fire was gone or just waiting to return. Then the Republic took him, filed him away in the machine of war. She watched the transport disappear into the clouds and told herself that he would be okay. Years passed, battles blurred, but she never forgot him. Not the boy, not the stillness, and not the feeling deep in the Force that he wasn't just a survivor. He was something the war would come back for. Then, the name surfaced. Darth Havok. A Sith Lord operating in the shadows. Quiet, surgical, almost myth. Fleets that vanished. Jedi who died without warning. Republic sabotage no one could trace. Arlen didn't hear the name in a debrief or briefing. She felt it, like a thread pulled through her spine. Something about the energy around that name. It wasn't foreign. It was familiar. She meditated for days in the halls of the Jedi Temple, searching for clarity. The Council had suspicions, but no confirmation. The mask Havok wore erased identity. His movements were ghost-like. His operations untraceable. But the Force whispered, and what it whispered chilled her. Because beneath the precision, beneath the fire, beneath the name, she felt the same silence she had once held in her arms. It couldn't be, but it was. The more she searched, the more the threads aligned. Missing records, classified transfers, the long-forgotten mention of Tairn Lenico in an SIS file marked compromised. No death notice, no body recovered, only absence. She didn't bring it to the Council. She couldn't. Because this wasn't about a Sith. It was about a boy who never cried. A child pulled from fire and sent into war. She followed the whispers alone, ignored her assignments, tracked small leads, fragments of Force echoes, signatures buried beneath death. The trail led across systems, Denon, Arda II, even Alderaan. And every time she arrived, she was too late. A fleet gone, a name unspoken, but always that silence in the Force. It was like chasing a ghost. But Arlen knew better. She wasn't chasing Darth Havok. She was trying to find the child she once failed to protect. The one who had looked up at her through smoke and ruin, too shocked to ask why the world had burned. And if he truly was the man behind the mask, then this wasn't about stopping him. It was about reaching him. Because if the Force had kept him alive through so much darkness, maybe, just maybe, there was still something inside him that remembered who pulled him from the fire. Not with power, not with light, but with care. And care, once given, is never truly forgotten. She followed him across scars, not trails, scars, burned supply depots, disabled beacons, Jedi corpses left without wounds, just silence. Each one carried a signature, not of rage, but of precision. Havok didn't leave messages. He left absence. Arlan could feel it in the Force. Not hatred, not fear, just purpose. And that frightened her more than any fury ever could. She had tracked Sith before. Duelists, assassins, inquisitors. Each burned with some form of chaos. A scream, a hunger, a madness that spilled into the room before they ever raised a blade. But Havok didn't scream. He exhaled. Quiet, measured, still. And when she closed her eyes to meditate on his energy, she didn't feel a Darth at all. She felt emptiness. The kind that chooses not to be filled. On Balmora, she interviewed survivors of a Republic outpost that collapsed without warning. They spoke of a calm figure, armor black, posture perfect, no words spoken. Someone who walked through their defenses without alerting a single sensor. The one soldier who survived said something she couldn't forget. He looked like he didn't want to be there. Like he was apologizing. With his silence. She said nothing. But inside, she felt it too. This wasn't war. This was erasure. And Havok wasn't reveling in it. He was disappearing into it. On terrace, she found the ruins of a Jedi scouting unit. No burn marks, no sabers drawn. Just silence and signs of misdirection, as if someone had led them into their own end without ever drawing a weapon. It was him. And he didn't kill them for power. He killed them like someone folding pages of a book that no longer needed to be read. Arlan meditated again. This time, longer. And when the Force opened itself to her, she saw flashes. A child hiding in the dark. A name whispered through smoke. A face behind a mask. Not cruel, but tired. She opened her eyes with a truth she didn't want to accept. He wasn't trying to win. He was trying to vanish. To cut every tie. Erase every name. Leave no version of himself behind. And if that was true, then she wasn't chasing him. She was trying to catch something already fading. She considered telling the council, but they would send a team. They would bring blades. They would end him. And she didn't want him dead. She wanted him seen. Because beneath the armor, she still believed there was a soul. One broken, yes, but not lost. Not fully. She remembered his eyes. The way he looked at her when she lifted him from rubble. Not with fear, with confusion. As if he couldn't understand why someone would carry him from fire instead of leaving him in it. That look had stayed with her for 2 decades. And now, it was the only thing left guiding her. So she didn't rush. She waited, watched, listened. Because this wasn't about interception. It was about the right moment. A place where his mask might slip. Where his blade might not be the first thing drawn. Where her voice could reach him before the silence did. And if she failed, if the boy was truly gone, then at least she would be the last voice he heard. One that didn't command, didn't condemn, only remembered. Because sometimes, redemption isn't about return. It's about being remembered long enough that someone, somewhere, still believes you could have been more. The moon had no name. Just jagged cliffs, thin air, and winds that howled like distant voices. It wasn't on any chart. No tactical value. No shelter. Only rock and silence. That's why she chose it. Arlan waited beneath the stars. Cloak pulled close, saber deactivated at her side. She had sent the signal hours before encrypted, buried in a frequency no one used anymore. A name. His name. Not Havok. Tairn. She wasn't sure he would come, but she knew he had received it. And in the quiet between gusts of wind, she felt it a shift in the Force. Heavy, controlled, cold. He didn't approach with stealth. He approached with intention. A figure emerged from the shadows, wrapped in black, steps slow, not cautious, but deliberate. His mask caught the faint silver of moonlight, not red, not monstrous, just blank. He stopped several meters away. Neither spoke. The wind passed between them like a ghost unsure which of them to follow. Then she said it. Tairn. No reaction. She tried again. Tairn Lenico. His mask tilted slightly. Not in confusion, in acknowledgement. You remember, she said quietly. Still, no answer. You should have died on Valmar, she continued. But you didn't. I carried you out. Do you remember that? The mask stayed still. She stepped forward, slowly, not reaching for her saber, not bracing for an attack. Do you remember my voice? He didn't speak, but she saw his fingers twitch just once near his belt. Not toward a weapon. Toward memory. She stopped a few paces closer. I don't know who you are now. I've read the reports. I've seen the aftermath. But I still feel the boy I held in my arms. And I know he's still listening. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm. Why are you here? It wasn't a threat. It was a question spoken like breath held too long. To see if you still are, she answered. Silence again. But it wasn't hollow. It was fragile. He took one step forward. What do you want? Arlen looked at him, not at the mask, but through it. I want you to stop disappearing. He exhaled, slow and quiet. You don't understand what I've done. I understand what they turned you into, she replied. I've seen what war does to boys who grow up too fast. He turned his head. You think this is about pain? No, she said softly. I think it's about surrender. He didn't move. You surrendered a long time ago. You just never noticed. The words hung between them. Then, he removed the mask. One hand, slow, unarmed. His face was pale, lined, tired. But his eyes were still the same. Not angry, not cruel, just lost. I don't know who I am anymore, he said. Arlen's voice cracked. You don't have to know. You just have to stop running from it. He looked away. I've killed too many to go back. She stepped closer. I'm not asking you to go back. He met her gaze. I can't be saved. She nodded. Maybe not. But you can still choose what you leave behind. He closed his eyes. And in that moment, just for that breath, the war stopped. No sabers. No orders. No lies. Only two voices. One who remembered, and one who no longer knew how to forget. He stood in the moonlight, mask in one hand, truth in the other. She didn't move, didn't press, didn't plead. She simply waited, because some decisions can't be forced, only received. Arlen had spoken all she could, not as a Jedi, not as a soldier, as someone who remembered him before the galaxy had a name for what he would become. I can take you back, she said quietly. You won't be alone. He looked at the ground, not in shame, in stillness. His voice was soft when he finally spoke. There is no way back. She stepped closer. There's always a way. He didn't flinch. There's no version of me that survives both names. He lifted the mask slowly, holding it between them. This is who I became when survival wasn't enough. Her eyes didn't waver. And who are you without it? He looked up at her, and for the first time in years, his voice cracked. I don't know. She placed her hand on his. Not to take the mask. To steady it. You don't have to wear it forever. He closed his eyes. But the force around him didn't close with them. It swirled, low, heavy, full of contradiction. "Every step I took," he whispered, "I thought I was making a choice, but I wasn't. I was walking the only road they left me." Arlan's breath hitched. "Tairn, no," he said, firm now. "He died in the fire." She shook her head. "No, he survived it. That's why I carried you out." His jaw tightened. "You carried a child. I carried a future." He looked away, and she knew she was losing him. Not to anger, to grief. "I thought if I burned everything behind me," he whispered, "the silence would finally go quiet." "But it didn't," she said. He nodded. "It got louder. The wind picked up, cold, unforgiving." He looked at her for a long time. Then he said it. "I want to stop." It wasn't a confession. It was a wish. She stepped forward again, slowly, as if every inch might scare him away. "You can." He looked at the stars. "The Empire won't let me." "Then we'll face them," she said. His eyes softened. "You're still trying to save me." She smiled, faint and tired. "No, I'm trying to remind you that you were never lost." They stood like that, side by side, on the edge of two worlds, one built on fire, the other on memory. He didn't move, but his grip on the mask loosened, just a little, and for one breathless second, she thought he might let it go. But then, the comm clip to his belt sparked. A signal, encrypted, urgent, Baraz. He didn't answer it, but he didn't ignore it either. He looked down at the device, and she saw it in his eyes. The pull, the weight, the leash. "You were wrong," he said quietly. She looked at him. "About what?" "This wasn't my choice." He turned, placed the mask back onto his face, and walked into the dark. She didn't follow, because she knew now. He wasn't afraid of dying. He was afraid that if he stopped being Darth Havok, there would be nothing left to replace him. And the galaxy doesn't remember the ones who hesitate. Corellia burned before he even arrived. The invasion had begun days earlier, Sith legions flooding through the skylanes, war machines carving through Republic streets, towers collapsing into dust. It wasn't a battle. It was a warning. Havok stood at the edge of the command deck as his shuttle descended. The skies above Coronet City glowed orange, the atmosphere thick with smoke and blaster fire. Somewhere beneath it all, civilians ran, soldiers screamed, and buildings groaned like dying creatures. He said nothing. Barris's orders were clear. Finish the breach. Destroy the Central Republic hub. Crush resistance. Leave no survivors in the target zone. No exceptions. But even before the shuttle touched down, something inside Havok was wrong. Not hesitation. Stillness. Not the calm before clarity, but the silence before something breaks. He stepped out into the chaos wearing black durasteel armor, red-lined and sharpened at the edges. Troopers parted as he walked. Sith officers saluted in fear, one even bowed. He didn't acknowledge them, because none of them mattered. Only the target did. A subterranean Republic data vault buried beneath the city's third sector. Reinforced, shielded, guarded by veterans too tired to retreat. It wasn't the intel that mattered. It was the message. Destroying it would collapse an entire communications relay. The Republic would lose access to half their defensive network across the mid-rim. They would retreat, disoriented. Corellia would fall within days. That was the plan. He studied the map in silence. Red markers blinked across the sector-friendly artillery zones, safe corridors, Sith infiltration teams. Havok memorized the layout within seconds. Then he deleted the map from his wrist display. He didn't need it. He moved through the ruins like a shadow. Blaster fire lit the streets around him. Republic soldiers screamed warnings when they saw him. Some ran, some fired, some froze. He passed through them like smoke, not because he wanted to, because they weren't the ones he came for. He descended into the underworks' flooded tunnels, collapsing floors, bodies lost beneath rubble. Every step felt heavier than the last, not from fatigue, from memory. This city reminded him of Valmar, not in structure, in aftermath. He passed a child's toy crushed beneath stone, a handprint smeared across the wall, a broken Republic helmet resting beside a ration pack, unopened. These weren't tactical markers. They were echoes. He reached the final checkpoint just before dawn. 3 Sith commandos stood waiting. They had cleared the outer defenses, killed everyone guarding the vault. One of them saluted. "My lord, the facility is locked but intact. We're ready for detonation." Havok stared at the door. It was sealed, but behind it, he felt life. Not soldiers, not Jedi. People, medics, engineers, wounded, hiding beneath the last place the Empire would expect civilians to run. The Sith officer stepped forward again. "Your orders." Havok didn't speak, because this wasn't about the mission anymore. It was about the weight in his chest, the one he'd carried for too long. He looked at the officer. "Leave." The soldier hesitated. "My lord." Now, there was no rage in his voice, only finality. The Sith obeyed, without question, without understanding. Havok stood alone before the door. He could feel the ignition codes pulsing at his fingertips. All it would take was a signal. One breath, one decision, and everything inside would vanish. Just like before. Just like Valmar. He lowered his hand. And for the first time in years, he disobeyed. The blast never came. Inside the vault, they waited. Blasters drawn, eyes on the ceiling, hearts pounding. They had seen the detonation team approach. They had heard the comms go silent. They knew what came next. And then, nothing. No fire. No collapse. Just silence. It didn't make sense. Until the door opened. Not with force. With a hiss. And in stepped a man wrapped in black, his mask catching the faint red glow of emergency lights. He didn't raise a weapon. He didn't speak. But everyone inside knew his name. Darth Havok. 3 Republic soldiers aimed their rifles before they even had time to process what was happening. One shouted, "Don't move." But he didn't move. He didn't need to. Their fingers trembled on the triggers, because it wasn't just the armor. It was the stillness. The same stillness found in every report that bore his name. He raised one hand not to attack, not to summon lightning, to show it was empty. A medic whispered, "Is it a trick?" A voice answered from the back of the group, "No, it's him." A woman stepped forward, older than the rest, wrapped in a dirt-streaked officer's cloak. Her hair was tied back. Her leg was wounded, wrapped in a crude brace. Captain Lenico. He knew the name, because once, long ago, she had taught him how to field strip a blaster during his first SIS training rotation. She took another step forward. "I know who you are," she said quietly. He didn't deny it. "I thought you were dead." He stayed silent. "They said you turned," she continued. "They said you were gone." Still, no answer. "But you're standing here." She nodded toward the medics behind her. "And you didn't kill us." One of the soldiers barked. "We should fire." "No," she said firmly. And that was the difference. Others would have run. Others would have obeyed fear. But not her. She had seen too much war to mistake silence for surrender. She limped closer. "I don't know what you've done," she said, "but I remember who you were." Her eyes didn't shake. "I remember Valmar." That word, that name, it cracked something in him that had been sealed behind years of flame and steel. He looked at her not with power, not with menace. Just tired eyes behind a mask he could no longer feel. She took another step. "You were just a boy," she whispered. "Now you're something else. But I don't think you ever stopped being him." He didn't know why he let her speak, but he did. Maybe because she didn't raise a weapon. Maybe because she didn't try to save him. She just remembered. The silence in the vault thickened. Then he said the only thing he could. "Go." She blinked. "What?" "You have time. Take them. Leave." One of the soldiers shouted. "Why should we trust you?" Captain Tavis raised a hand. "Because if he wanted us dead, we'd be ash already." She didn't say it with hope. She said it like fact. Then she turned to her people. "Grab the wounded. Move. Now." Havok stepped aside. No threat, no trick, just permission. They passed him in silence, one by one. Some looked back, some didn't, some couldn't. But none of them spoke. Not until the last child, a medic's son, no older than 6, looked up at the masked man in black. And didn't see a monster. Only someone who didn't flinch when fire threatened to return. Then they were gone. And Darth Havok stood alone. Not in victory. In something else. Something even quieter than silence. He stood in the empty vault, long after they were gone. The lights flickered above him, a slow, pulsing red that cast long shadows against the walls. Every corner still smelled of smoke, of heat, of almost. The detonation charges were still armed. One command, and the entire structure would collapse. He could walk away as if nothing had happened. He could tell Barras the job was done. No witnesses, no survivors, no questions. But he didn't move, because the choice had already been made. Not with words, not even with mercy. It had been made in silence. When he stepped aside, when he didn't raise the blade, when he saw a child look at him without fear. It wasn't redemption. It wasn't rebellion. It was surrender to something he hadn't let himself feel in years. Tairn Lenico. Not the name, not the past, but the weight of everything he thought he had buried. He walked to the center of the vault, sat down on the floor, removed the mask. For the first time since the rituals on Dromund cars, he let the cold air touch his face without armor between it. He closed his eyes and waited. For what, he didn't know. But part of him hoped someone would stop him. That the Empire would send a voice, a warning, a hand to drag him back. But no signal came. Only static, only quiet. He thought of Barras, of the path he'd been given, of every order followed without question, every choice made to feel like destiny, every life taken, not out of anger, but out of design. And he realized something no Sith had ever taught him. True control was not obedience. It was refusal. He reached for the calm. His hand hovered. He could lie. He could disappear. He could burn it all. But instead, he set the calm down and stood, not as a Darth, not as a spy, not even as a soldier, just a man. One whose silence had spoken louder than any blade. He left the charges in place, but disconnected their link. One by one. No destruction. No report. Just inaction. It was the most dangerous thing he'd ever done. And the truest. Outside, the fires still raged across Corellia. Buildings collapsed, fighters roared overhead. The war hadn't noticed his pause. The galaxy hadn't seen his hesitation. But he had. He looked at his hands steady, calloused, stained by years of silence and shadow. Then he walked, through rubble, through flame, through smoke that clung to his cloak like a memory. No one stopped him. No one followed. No one saw. He made it halfway through the Undercity before he dropped the calm into a sewer drain and left the mask beside it. He didn't need it anymore. Not here. Not after this. Because the next breath he took didn't belong to Darth Havok. And it didn't belong to Tairn Lenico either. It belonged to someone new. Someone uncertain. Someone who had just made a choice no Sith was supposed to make. To walk away from fire, not because he feared it, but because he finally understood what it meant to survive it. He didn't run. He walked, through smoke thick as nightfall, across streets no longer mapped, past soldiers who didn't see him or pretended not to. Corellia burned behind him. The Empire called it progress. The Republic called it tragedy. But he called it finished. Darth Havok was gone. Not slain, not captured, not declared fallen in some battle report. Just gone. No signal, no trace, no command. He left the mask in a ruin buried beneath the city's collapsed sector. It would survive the fire, but not him. He shed his name without a ceremony, no Sith ritual, no Jedi absolution, just ash. Just footsteps that grew quieter with each breath. He boarded a cargo skiff, moving through the outer scrapyards. The pilot never saw his face, didn't ask, didn't care. These places were full of ghosts wearing armor too heavy to keep. He sat in the back, silent, staring at the horizon. Somewhere in the stars, Barras would be calling for him, demanding answers, asking where his weapon had gone. But there would be no answer. Because weapons don't disappear. Only men do. The skiff moved through shattered towers, through civilian districts that still smoldered from orbital strikes. He passed children searching for their parents, medics digging through broken stone, troopers too tired to keep holding their rifles upright. He saw it all. And for the first time in years, he didn't look away. He had been taught that hesitation was weakness, that mercy was sabotage. But what no one told him was this: silence is not surrender, it's choice. And for once, he had made one that didn't come from a datapad or a master. He had walked away. He didn't know where the skiff would take him. Didn't know what name he would give at the next port. Didn't know how long he could keep running before someone else found him. But he knew this. He wasn't Darth Havok anymore. And he wasn't Tairn Lenico either. He was something that didn't yet have a word. Just breath. And regret. And the faint, distant echo of someone whispering his name in kindness. Arlen. Her voice still lingered in the quiet. Not loud, not pleading, just real. It had reached him where sabers couldn't. He had no illusions about what he had done. Worlds burned under his hands. Orders followed without question. Lives ended for reasons he no longer remembered. He wouldn't be forgiven. But maybe he could stop adding to the fire. Maybe silence could be more than a weapon. Maybe it could be a warning. The skiff landed in a scrapyard outside the city. He stepped off alone. No armor, no orders, no name, just wind and dust. And one last memory of a child hiding beneath broken stone, waiting for the fire to pass. The boy had survived. The man had burned. But something still remained. And maybe that would be enough. For now, He didn't choose the first world. It chose him. A cargo freighter en route to the Outer Rim broke atmosphere over Nar Shaddaa and lost power. He slipped out the hatch before it landed, vanished into the rain, and disappeared into the deepest levels of the moon no one called home. Nar Shaddaa wasn't a place people remembered. It was where they went to be forgotten. Perfect. He didn't wear the armor, didn't carry the saber. He traded the mask for a scarf, a cloak, a hood pulled low. No name, no credits, just silence. He lived in the underlevels where power flickered and air recycled slower than it should, where life didn't ask questions and death didn't bother with ceremony. He watched gang wars from rooftops, broke up fights without using the force, ate what he could, slept when it came, didn't speak unless he had to. And still, the galaxy kept spinning. The Empire didn't fall. The Republic didn't burn. The Force didn't answer. It just kept moving, with or without him. So he left. No message, no trail. Next was Malachor Vive. He remembered it from whispers. Jedi feared it. Sith studied it. A world broken by its own history, cracked in half by the mass shadow generator during the Mandalorian Wars. He didn't go for knowledge. He went because nothing lived there. And that was the closest thing to peace he thought he deserved. The ground there was jagged obsidian. The air was thin. The Force, corrupted. But it spoke to him in the silence. It didn't welcome him. It didn't push him away. It just acknowledged him, like one wound recognizing another. He spent weeks among the ruins, reading old carvings, walking ancient paths, sleeping beside the skeletons of temples built by hands that no longer existed. No one came, not even the Sith, because even they had stopped looking. He thought about staying, letting the stone and the dark bury him slowly until memory gave up. But his body didn't give in, even when he wanted it to. So he walked again. This time, to Zeost. Once a world of power, now a graveyard frozen in time. The final battle there had left the surface shattered. Cities turned to black stone. People frozen mid-motion, like the Force itself had gasped and never exhaled. He stepped over statues that used to breathe, passed through homes still filled with ash. He found shelter in a collapsed vault beneath an old Sith compound. No lights, just stone, cold, endless cold. And still, he didn't die. He tried, not by blade, by silence. He stopped eating, stopped moving, sat for days, for weeks, waiting for the Force to make a choice. But it never did. Because Zeost, like Nar Shaddaa and Malachor, didn't care who he used to be. It didn't remember his name, didn't need him to choose a side. It just existed. And for a while, so did he. No mission, no master, no mask, just breath, and ruin, and a life no longer tethered to anything. He was a Sith without a cause, a weapon with no command, a ghost even the Force had stopped chasing. And the galaxy, the one he once served, once fought, once burned, didn't notice. Because there are some men who vanish not with explosions, but with silence. The galaxy had forgotten his name, but his enemies hadn't. They just didn't agree on what it meant anymore. To the Empire, he was a traitor. To the Republic, he was a ghost. To those who understood war, he was a liability no one could afford to leave breathing. So they sent shadows, not armies. Whispers. The first came on Nar Shaddaa, a Devaronian bounty hunter in blue armor. Didn't speak. Just tracked him through the alleys until Havok turned and waited. The fight was over in 12 seconds. No weapons, just precision. The body was gone by morning. The second came weeks later, on a transport docked at Malestar, a Republic operative posing as crew. He carried a blade carved from Frick and a data chip listing Havok's former aliases. Havok disarmed him. Read the chip, then let him live. The agent didn't understand why, but Havok did. Killing him would have meant something, and he wasn't ready to mean anything yet. The Sith came after that. They weren't sent by Barros, not officially, but Havok could feel the message in their silence. You don't get to walk away. The assassins struck on Aridus, two twins trained by the Order of Wrath, faces covered, sabers twin arcs of flame. They never spoke. He didn't speak either. When it ended, the desert buried them, but not the truth. They had followed a signal, one only Barros could have activated, and that meant he wasn't done with him. The Republic came again on Ziost. A Jedi Knight this time. Young, steady, certain. She didn't draw her saber when she found him meditating beside the ruin. I don't want to fight, she said. He looked at her, calm. You followed me. She nodded. You're a danger. He didn't argue. She stepped closer. But you haven't killed since Corellia. Why? He said nothing. Because there was no answer. She sat across from him in silence. Hours passed. Then she stood. If you ever decide to speak, she said, we're still listening. He didn't stop her. Didn't need to. Because she wasn't a threat. She was a mirror, and he wasn't ready to look yet. They came less frequently after that. The bounty postings slowed. The agents changed faces. The Jedi stopped searching openly. Not because they believed he was gone, but because the man they remembered was, and the one who remained, didn't fit their reports. He wasn't a Sith, wasn't a Jedi, wasn't an assassin, wasn't a man on a mission. He was something else. Something that didn't answer when spoken to, didn't fight unless pushed, didn't leave messages, only questions. Who survives after the war ends? What do you do when the silence becomes louder than the command? How long can a shadow walk without something to cast it? He had no answers. Only breath, only movement, only days that bled into each other until names stopped mattering. But even ghosts cast echoes, and every step he took on every world where no one was supposed to look, someone always did. Because men like him don't disappear. They haunt, not with vengeance, but with the possibility that one day they might return, not for war, but for themselves. And no one knows what a man like that becomes, until he stops running. Ziost was never warm. Even before the cataclysm, it had been a world shaped by cold stone and colder wills. But after the Emperor's purge, after every living thing was turned to ash and memory, the cold became something else. A presence, a weight, a grave. Havok arrived without purpose, not seeking answers, not hiding, just drifting. The landing site was nothing but blackened snow, and the remains of towers carved into impossible angles. Winds scraped across the surface like claws dragging along metal. Even the force felt muted here, as if it too feared to speak. He walked anyway. His boots left faint impressions on the frozen ground. Each step sounded distant, swallowed by the silence that seemed carved into the bones of the planet. He wandered through what had once been a city, faces frozen mid-scream, statues of people who never meant to be statues. He paused beside one of them, a woman holding a child, their forms preserved by a force wound that had never healed, their expressions caught between terror and disbelief. He touched the stone, cold, unmoving, forever paused. He knew the feeling. He continued deeper into the city. There were places even Sith avoided, vaults, where voices still whispered without breath. He passed one such place, hearing echoes that didn't belong to the living. His own name was not among them. Good. He climbed the remains of a tower and looked out across the dead horizon. Snow drifted upward instead of down. The sky pulsed faintly, like a wound reopening with every gust of wind. He sat, cross-legged, hands resting on his knees. The posture came from habit, not peace. His breath fogged in the air. He didn't meditate. He didn't need to. Ziost did the thinking for him. It showed him memories he didn't ask for, flashes of the past he had tried to bury. Valmar's burning sky. His mother's final breath. Tharasa's voice offering purpose. The mask sealing to his face. The Corellian vault door opening without fire. He didn't fight the memories. He let them pass. Because resisting meant caring. And he wasn't sure he cared anymore. Hours slipped into days. Days blurred into something slower. Time bent on Ziost. He stopped eating. Stopped searching. Stopped pretending there was somewhere else to go. The cold crept into his bones, into his breath, into his thoughts. He didn't resist. If this was the end, it would be quiet. Not a duel. Not betrayal. Not flame. Just stillness. A fitting place for a man who had spent his entire life running from the fire left in his chest. His eyes closed. His breath slowed. His thoughts dimmed. Not from exhaustion, from acceptance. Ziost seemed to lean closer, as if waiting to claim him. The wind circled around him in spirals. The air tightened. The darkness beneath the snow pulsed with old hunger. He felt warmth leave his fingers, then his chest, then everything. The world dimmed, sound faded, and for one fragile moment, he almost let go. No anger, no regret, no name, just a quiet surrender to the cold. A life ending not in punishment,